Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Today is an opportunity to get curious about curiosity because our guest is Debra Clary, leadership strategist, researcher, and executive coach with more than 40 years of experience working with organizations including Frito-Lay, Coca-Cola, Jack Daniels, and Humana. Deb has earned a reputation as a leading expert on curiosity, drawing on her doctorate in leadership and organization development and her work with hundreds of executives and teams. She's a coach, she's a TEDx speaker, former off Broadway performer, and her new book, available now, is called The Curiosity Curve, which brings together her research and real world coaching experience to help leaders navigate change and growth. So we all need that. Deb, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. Before we get into the main question, I'm curious. I saw in your bio you had a one woman show. Tell us about that first, if you would.
Yes. So, how that came about was during COVID, there were some executive women around the country that we were a mastermind group. And, what are you struggling with? How can we help each other? What are your hopes and dreams? In August of 2022, they came to Louisville, where I live, and said they had something to celebrate. And so we were chinking champagne glasses, and they said, "Oh, we're celebrating Deb." And I was like, "What are you talking about? I didn't do anything yet. I didn't do anything yet." And they go, "Oh, we forgot to tell you. We pitched your idea for a one-woman show, and you're booked off Broadway."
Wow.
And it was like, "No, I don't want to do that." I was just dreaming about it, and they go, "It's time to make the dream happen." And so that's how that one-woman show off Broadway happened, and it was called A Curious Woman. And it was about being a woman in the 80s and 90s, working at big major corporations, and some of the just comedic things that happened to me there.
So it doesn't sound like that was a mistake doing this.
So in a minute, it was close, but we pulled it off.
Good. So I don't know. Maybe I just hijacked or interrupted the answer to the story.
Well, no, not at all.
The main, the main question I'm going to ask you, as we always do, because you've done so many things. What's your favorite mistake?
One of my favorite mistakes was I was with a friend in Italy, and we were taking a train up from Milan to Lake Como, and we missed our stop and kept going. And we ended up in this amazing little village that we explored and ended up staying there. And had we not missed that stop, we wouldn't have ever seen this really beautiful village. And we just enjoyed every moment of it.
Wow. So there's an example, I guess, of a happy accident, if you will.
Yes.
So, I mean, walk us through a little more of that. It sounds like then, thankfully, it was a fairly loosely planned vacation where missing a stop didn't mean missing a flight or a cruise ship or something.
Yes, and of course, you've been to Europe, so you know that it's pretty easy to get around by, train or public transportation, so we had been very planful about our visit in Milan, but then we said, "Hey, let's go do something else," and so Lake Como was on the list, and we were busy chatting and just went right by it, and now we did stay at that little village, and then we circled back and went back to Lake Como, and we're glad that we did,
Mhm.
but it was just, one of being flexible and kinda laughing at ourselves, but still enjoying ourselves when we're on this trip.
Yeah. What was the name of the village that you ended up exploring then?
De Luca?
DeLuca. Now, did the people traveling with you share apparently your sense of curiosity of, here we are. Let's explore it. It seemed
They
super tough. Sure.
Yes, yes, they did, and that's probably one reason we traveled so well together is because we like to be planful, but we also like to have spontaneity. If something else occurs or someone tells us about something that we hadn't thought about, we just look at each other and say, "Let's go."
Yeah. What I hear you saying is having a balance between the plan, but leaving some room for serendipity. I'm with you on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely, and it's just one of what unfolds.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll come back and connect to the story. Were there similar anything, thinking, your career where there was, I don't know, trying to force an analogy, a missed stop, a missed opportunity that also led to something positive.
So when I was just right out of grad school, I was out of business school. I went to my first job interview at Frito-Lay. I was going to be a manager, like my first professional job. And they didn't offer me the manager role. They offered me a Frito-Lay route driver. So I would be at Teamsters Local 336. And I said, I need to think about it. And I was expecting to be wearing a suit every day and a company car. And so I went home and I said to my mother, this is what they've offered me. And she said in her sweetest Tennessee accent, well, how hard could it be? And and it was like, like the mailman, sleet, hail,
Mhm.
heat, bugs, all of those kind of things. But in the end, that truck became my classroom. Whatever I had learned in business school, it compared to nothing that what it was to actually manage your own P&L, to build relationships, and to be able to measure your results day in and day out by what you did exactly. So at the time, I thought it was a huge mistake because my girlfriends were working at Procter and Gamble and Colgate, and they
Yeah.
looked really pretty, and their nails weren't chipped up, and
Yeah.
but now I look back and think about that's really was the start of the trajectory of my
Mhm.
career.
Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting progression of like times we feel like we're making a mistake, but it's only in hindsight where you can have the reflection to say, well, it would have been a mistake to not do it. I've had similar twists in some of my, especially early career decisions where I felt like, oh, this was a mistake, but it turned out to be a great learning experience.
Absolutely, and I suspect you hold this philosophy as well, is there's probably no mistakes, right, that aren't upon reflection, you're learning something and you're growing.
I mean, I've had some guests who were or are still Buddhist monks. I mean, they'll take that fairly, kind of far to the one side of the spectrum view of, no mistakes, only things that were meant to happen. I try to embrace that. I mean, I try to look for the positive at least when there's a seemingly a mistake. But I'm curious back to Frito Lay. Was that an intentional career development, like learn the business from the ground up opportunity? Like I have friends who or people I've interviewed even on this podcast who joined Toyota, with degrees, and they get sent to go work on the assembly line for a period of
Mhm.
time. Was your situation kind of typical for Frito Lay?
I thought so, but I later learned that that's not always the case. But what it was shared with me is that everyone starts on the route because we want you to learn it from the bottom up. And Frito-Lay was also Teamsters. So if you were Teamsters and then you came out of that, you had some empathy, and you understood how to do
Mhm.
that. But when I got promoted and a couple of times, and then I went to headquarters, and people were saying, yeah, I came into this marketing role. And I'm like, what? You didn't have to drive a truck? And
Yeah.
like, "What you talking about?" I'm like, "Well, maybe it doesn't apply to everybody," but I wouldn't take anything back because I learned so much, and it's also about the fortitude. I mean, did I have the physical strength and the endurance to do that day in
Mhm.
and day out?
Yeah. And then, as you moved up through the ranks, yeah, I mean, I think that ability to empathize, to understand, to connect with people at the front line is really important. It's a mistake if you can't do that.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I suspect there are ways to not have to run a route or not work the line, but it'd be one of deeply trying to understand what people are experiencing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious, where did your passion for curiosity come from then? Because that, was a focus of your one woman show, focus of your book, and I mean, how did you decide to really dive into that?
Yes, so it started with a joke, a question, and a puzzle, and all within a matter of weeks. So I was just talking about this trip that I took, and I was on a train from Rome to Florence, and I was sitting next to this really handsome Italian man, and he says to me, "Hey, are you American?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he goes, "Oh, I have the best American joke for you." He goes, "What do you get when you ask an American a question?" "I don't know." He goes, "This is so funny." He goes, "You get an answer." Okay, now, like, I didn't get the joke, and I just politely smiled, but that joke kinda lingered with me throughout my stay in Italy as I began to notice other Italians and Europeans in conversation. Their conversations were different. It wasn't like a ping pong match, yes, no, maybe. There was this deep dialogue about trying to, really understand why'd you ask that question, right?
Mhm.
In America, someone said, "Why'd you ask that question?" Like, those are, like, kind of fighting words. And so that was the joke that was anything but funny. Then I came back to work. I'm sitting next to my CEO in the boardroom, and somebody was presenting, and he quietly asked me, "Hey, do you think curiosity can be learned or is it innate?" And so I don't know, but I'm going to go do some research. And that same week, Gallup released their engagement studies. So, in the history of studying engagement, they had never seen engagement so low. So, that was the puzzle.
Mhm.
I got a joke, a question, and a puzzle, and I began to wonder, could curiosity be the missing link?
Mm. Is there a way of gauging the level of curiosity in a team or in an organization? If you're looking for, I would believe the connections, correlations, or causations that being more highly curious and allowing that to flourish would lead to, let's say, more innovation, better problem solving, better results. How would you
No.
get?
Yeah, so as we started on our journey to do primary research on curiosity, because what I learned there was some research out there, but there wasn't enough to satisfy my understanding of how curiosity could shift. So we did some primary research, and it took them about 3 months to do it. They came back and said, "Your hypothesis is correct. There is a direct correlation between leadership performance and curiosity." And I said,
Mm.
"Tell me more." They said, "Well, it's funny that if there is a leader that has a high level of curiosity, five things happen within a team: higher engagement, higher retention, higher job satisfaction, innovation, and speed to decision making."
Mm.
And so it was fantastic. And then we said, "All right, we're sitting on this amazing data. The next question is, how do we measure curiosity?"
Right.
So they went back for another 3 or 4 months, came back and said, "We created a validated diagnostic tool where we can measure people's level of curiosity at the individual level, the team, at the work level." How would we measure that? Somebody would take a 6 or 7 minute assessment online, and then we have data that indicates that. Now,
Yeah.
because curiosity can be learned and it's contagious, then we knew, well, right, we can create a framework where we teach people how to be more curious for the sake of the culture that leads to performance.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me. I mean, as an engineer, process is a great word for me. So, yeah, diving into how this happens, you don't just tell people simply, "Well, be more curious."
That's right.
Yeah,
No.
can you tell us a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, well, the first thing I let people know is that it's not your fault you're incurious.
Mm.
We know through our research that toddlers ask 298 questions a day. As adults, we ask about 5. And so what happened between childhood and, our adult years? Well, we're taught to be incurious. When we go to school and we're told to sit in our chairs, don't speak until you're spoken to, children be seen and not heard. There's a lot of reasons we need children to be listening while they're teaching, but there's other little subtle things too, like curiosity killed the cat. Don't open Pandora's box. The story about Adam and Eve. She got curious and mayhem fell over the world. So we slowly are taught to be incurious. And then we go on to the university, we go on to grad school. Maybe we're a medical doctor, maybe we're a lawyer, and we are paid for that expertise.
Mhm.
We're paid for that. And oh, by the way, we don't have a whole lot of time. So when somebody comes in and asks us a question, we give them the answer and we send them along their way. And when we do that, we solve one problem. But what if leaders were playing the long game in the sense of someone asks them a question, or here's the problem, and as opposed to answering it, saying, "What have you thought about? Have you solved something that's similar to that?" Is, taking them through that, inquiry so that they builds their own confidence that, hey, I can solve this as well.
So you answered the question I was going to press you for an answer around, can curiosity be learned? You said yes.
Yes.
So if that's true, we talk about these assessments. So I was starting to wonder, like, would you do an assessment during the hiring process to find out, all things being equal, are you better off hiring people who are already more curious, or would you look at all the other skills and experiences and feel confident that, well, maybe if they were maybe a little bit lacking in curiosity, if they come into a culture that's highly curious, we can teach them
Mhm.
more curious themselves? Is that fair, or what do you think?
That absolutely fair. So curiosity is contagious. So we found that if a leader has a high level of curiosity, the majority of their team are also going to have a high level of curiosity. And the reverse is true, right? So
Mm,
if you were to bring someone in that's incurious to a high curious team, their curiosity would rise. And the same is true. You put a curious person on a team where others are not, they're going to lower that as well.
yeah.
And so, to answer your question about do you hire somebody already curious or you can teach them, the most important thing for me is what's the current state of the culture, right?
Mhm.
Do you have a culture that's curious and now you're looking to people to match that? But if you don't have a curious culture and you're trying to bring somebody in, they're probably gonna get disappointed when others aren't following those kind of line of questioning.
Mhm. Yeah, I could certainly understand. Yeah, if somebody knows they are a highly curious person, that's a good thing to be aware of. But then trying to think, if you're on the potential employee side, how do you interview the organization to
Mhm,
see how you're going to fit? And, like, from your perspective or research, like, it seems like that fit or lack of fit when it comes to curiosity would be like a very impactful misfit, as opposed to other factors like curiosity. I don't know if, like, us if values is the right word, but
mhm.
like that would be hard to look past and say, well, everything else is a fit, but not this.
Yes and no, because I think if the culture is gonna support if the culture is already curious, and then you're bringing someone in that's not quite like that, they too, when they begin to see that, oh, questions are welcomed or challenging the status quo is welcome, is that most likely they're gonna say, "Oh, this is a cool place to work because they value my opinion."
Yeah. So the title, again, kind of reset. Deb Clary. The book is The Curiosity Curve. So I've done enough math, and I think about charts and curves, and
Right.
is there? You brought up the phrase I was thinking of. To a point, does curiosity kill the cat? Are there diminishing returns where curiosity leads a team down a rabbit hole where it might actually slow decision making?
Yes, absolutely. There is a set point. There's an optimal amount of curiosity. So in the curiosity curve, there are four factors that we measure. One is exploration, inspirational creativity, openness to new ideas, and focused engagement. So along your line of questions is around exploration. So if you have someone that lives in exploration day in and day out, but they never move to execution, that's not a good scenario. And on the other hand, if you have someone that lives in execution and is not exploring, then you're probably not innovating. And I'll give you an example. When I was at the Coca-Cola company, I had this awesome opportunity to be the chief of staff for the president of the Coca-Cola. I was junior in my career and I was going to be able to see how all the pieces fit together. And every Monday morning I would meet with Tom and he would be going on and on and on. And I was writing as fast as I could. And I would leave there and start to try to put a plan around what I heard him say. The next Monday I go back, I'm ready to present out how we could execute it. He's like, oh, no, no, no. And then he would start all over again. And this went on for about 3 weeks. And I'm like, man, I'm failing. And so I called the chief of staff that was in the role before and I said, I'm really struggling. I'm not meeting Tom's needs. And he says, what's happening? And so I share the story and he goes, oh, I should have told you. Unless he asks 3 times, take no action.
Oh, yeah.
So he was in explore mode when I was hearing, I'm junior, I need to go help execute against this. And so now I've learned when I'm dealing with someone that's exploring and ideating, at the end of the conversation, I'll say, "What actions do you want me to take?" In this case, Tom would have said, "Oh, nothing. I'm brainstorming."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Now, focused engagement is one that actually you're in a conversation and now you can actually get it done. So you move from exploring and then you go into taking it action. Now, all of us have some elements of those four factors. It's on a continuum. And we know that we can continuously improve on all four of those factors, but most people are high on one and a little bit lower on another. And that's the beauty of doing the curiosity curve assessment on a team, because then you have language to say, I see where he's at right now. I'm gonna stay with them, but then I'm gonna say, all right, who's gonna do what to get this done?
Yeah. Yeah. From your research or from your coaching or other experiences, like, is there a story that comes to mind that illustrates how the lack of curiosity causes a problem for a team or a business?
Yeah, so I had a CEO come to me earlier this year, and they wanted me to come in and lead a 2-day strategy session. And in that, I said, Could we also do the curiosity curve assessment?" And he's like, placated me, like, "Okay, that's fine." But he wasn't completely sold on it. So here's what they were facing: their revenue had slowed. Their competitive edge had declined. They weren't launching new products as fast as others, and they had high turnover. So it's not a good situation to be in. They recognize it. And so we need to get to an offsite, really understand this. So when we did the section on curiosity, and they had taken the assessment in advance, when it came to openness to new ideas, I'm showing them their data, and all I'm showing them is data points, no names. And under openness to new ideas, 8 executives scored off the chart openness to new ideas, and one was low. And I'm like, well, why are they not going out with new products? And so I opened that up to the group and I waited, and the CEO raised his hand and said, "That low score is me."
Hmm.
And we had built up enough psychological safety. I said, "Team, how do you feel about that?" And they go, "Yeah, he's weak." And with data, SWOT analysis, and we get turned down. And the CEO said, "I'm the founder. Like, this is my baby. And I think I have all the answers."
Yeah.
And I said, "How's it working for you?" Then he goes, "I need to change." And so then in a moment when you see the CEO, the person with the most power, were just waiting the rest of the team.
Yeah. That's a trap I see a lot of feeling like you need to have all the answers or feeling like you do have all the answers. Like, the difference between knowing all day long versus figuring it out. I mean, I think, to me, curiosity and figuring it out go together. There's connections, it seems, these building blocks. You mentioned psychological safety, like these things that lead to innovation. Like, that CEO might have a team of curious people that are being shut down because he's telling him no or not listening.
Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting, maybe, if you could invite you to explore this a little bit more of, like, leaders often, like, they want the end result. They want innovation or they want success. And maybe innovation leads to success, but I think it's interesting to step back and try to encourage them to look at building blocks like curiosity, that you don't
Mm,
just snap your fingers and get innovation.
mm,
How do you
mm.
kinda coach people through that understanding that working on these foundations is important?
Yeah, so yesterday I was doing an executive team for a university, and specifically they were the athletic department, and so I'd never done anything like that. I'm mostly in large organizations, or nonprofits or corporations, so this was, like, totally new for me, and so I was, running to keep up with them in terms of it's crossover season, but the thing was the person that runs the media. So media is really important because, the news show calls and says, "We need a 45-minute clip, and it needs to have these kind of elements in it." And he goes, "It's so frustrating because I have all these constraints. Like, I have to have it in 30 minutes and it has to be 45 seconds." So I'd listened to him and I said, have you heard the saying that creativity craves constraints? Where you only have, and this happens all the time in corporations, I want you to increase sales by 5%, but I'm not giving you any more budget. We have this continuous constraints on us. And so then it goes to curiosity. So he and I walked through. I said, what are some questions you could ask the media channel? Like,
Mhm.
all right, it's got to be 45 seconds. Got it. But what are some of the things that your audience are going to want to see in this? And then you like you're partnering with them on that. And he saw it all as a negative. And I said, I get it, constraints, but how could you turn it around and be curious?
Mhm. And then what was the reception to that?
Well, you could just see like this, like his shoulders softened and he was like, oh, I'd never thought of that before. They're not out to get me. They're just this is what they're up against. And if we want our reel on TV, this is what I have to do.
Yeah.
And so he then saw it as a challenge and an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it sounds like they're on their part an assumption being made, and this is something you explore. Even the gap between knowing and figuring it out, the gap between knowing and assuming we know. It sounds like curiosity would be a really important trait. Like I think of mentors and coaches I've had of being clear. Do we know or are we assuming? Being curious enough to explore that question, curious enough to explore what would we need to learn to turn an assumption into a fact. Is that
Mhm.
something you see leaders struggling with?
Yeah. And what I find them struggling with mostly is that they think it's going to take a long time if I have to ask people questions. Right? So they're playing the short game versus the long game. And the reality is, asking an additional 3 or 4 more questions doesn't take that much time,
Yeah.
but your return on that time is gonna be extraordinary
Mhm.
versus making an assumption and heading in a direction. Now, there are times when it's a crisis or you don't have that luxury that you have to get something d we've all been in those, you're called up to the CFO's office, "Man, it's gotta be done today." And I always when I was called in that, I said, "All right, here's the upside of doing that. We're gonna hit your timeline. The downside is I might be missing a lot of data. Are
Yeah.
you okay? Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do my best work in the next 3 hours. Are you okay with that?" And just taking another step or 2 to ask follow-up questions is there's a great return on your time. I guess you would say a great return on your question. I don't come up with an acronym for
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you talk about the time and the place for urgency and action. You think about, let's say, professional firefighters, not the proverbial firefighting in a workplace, but like literally, it seems to be the first step is put the fire out and make sure it's not going to reignite, and then be curious about the cause, right?
Absolutely. It's about that, yeah, take care of the situation. And then when everyone is heart is stop beating so fastly, is just say, what did we think happened here? I mean, the Army does an amazing job. It's called after action reviews.
Right.
So this happened. And, I do that with myself when I do something and I'm like, all right, I just have to think about it myself. Or, well, now that I've had that experience, what would I do differently? And I go into reflection and say, okay, now move on. My grandmother always said, look back, but don't stare. Right. So I'll look back for a minute and then I'll say, okay, keep moving.
Yeah, that's a great phrase to think about. Like again, the balance between reflecting but not dwelling on something, reflecting,
Yes.
moving ahead.
Yes. Yes.
So when you think about these, pressure situations, whether it's a fire or a business emergency, I would imagine the fight or flight response really hurts our ability to be curious. Like, would highly curious people in a stressful situation have trouble using that part of our brain?
Well, yeah, especially if they've never been in that situation before, right? I think about a pilot or an ER doctor. I mean, they're probably seeing it over and over. They train for it. They train for it. But particularly when something happens that we don't have experience on that or even anything close to it, I think that's when we go into directing and close it down. Let's get moving on this. But if you have a little bit of an experience, maybe you open up. I don't know. I just what thing that occurred to me is during COVID, I had a dear friend. She was the chief operating officer for NYU Medical. Then
Mhm.
she went to Yale. and the chief patient officer, and now COVID hits.
Yeah.
And she had this deep expertise in terms of how to run a hospital and how to keep people safe until COVID. And so she was sitting there thinking, I've got to protect my staff. I got to protect the patients. There's so many unknowns. And what she did is she got some executives from the airlines on a call and said, how do you keep people safe in the air with air filtration? And they went through their whole process, and then they ended up installing the same thing that the airlines had on those. And so the point is like, all right, I know I don't know, but who might know? And then it's, finding that, and we call it inspirational creativity. You take what you know to the unknown, but you find out from others.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great example where, yeah, I mean, curiosity doesn't have to translate into, I got to figure it out myself. I could be curious about what others have done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One other thing I want to ask Deb, something that's important to me, and we talk about sometimes with guests, and I've written about, is using a small mistake as an opportunity to learn and to prevent a big mistake. It seems like curiosity, as opposed to being dismissive, would put us down that more constructive path. Where I know of situations where there's a small mistake, someone's dismissive, maybe partly because it's a small mistake, and then the problem festers and gets worse. Do you have an example where curiosity, helped someone lean into a small mistake in a way that prevented a big catastrophe, or what would your thoughts be about that in
Well,
general?
like someone made a small mistake and then they reflected on it.
Yeah,
Is that
like,
what
the
you
curiosity to explore, well, why did that small mistake happen? And could that same situation lead to a big mistake? Like, one example an ER doctor friend uses would be, let's say somebody in the emergency department almost gives the wrong dose of ibuprofen to a patient. Like, that wouldn't have been a fatal error. And, the leader might dismiss it and say, well, look, no harm, no foul. You caught it. That wouldn't be a big deal. But like the same distraction or failure causes a failure could lead to a fatal dose of a different medication
Mhm.
being given. So I would think leaders that are curious would be more curious to explore the small mistake, even if it didn't cause harm.
Yeah, absolutely. And this might be tangentially related to this, but I remember being in a executive meeting. And so we have someone that runs the clinical side of it, and then we had someone that runs the operational side of it. They're completely different groups, but they support one another. And we were moving into an area we had never done before. Like this was a new business that we were taking on. And they were like arguing with one another, and I stopped them for a moment and I said, could you please give a definition of that word?
Mhm.
And he gave it. And then I said to the other person, what is your definition? They were talking about two completely different things. Now, they were getting ready to spend, hundreds of millions of dollars in their departments to support something that they weren't even talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
And it was just this look on their face of we're arguing about something because we have different definitions.
Yeah. Yeah. And being curious about exploring that sounds like could have headed off or did head off a really potentially expensive mistake.
Yeah, and the learning was we're going into an area that we don't know anything about,
Mhm.
right? And so we're taking on something, a huge initiative. We need to understand, or what are their acronyms? What do the words mean? And we're not making assumptions.
Yeah. This may be a bit of a tangent, but one of those words I find asking, I get hung up on words, and sometimes I take things very literally to a fault. But people start throwing around the word accountability, and I have to call time out. Like, what does that word mean to you? Like, are you talking about letting people be accountable, or are you talking about blaming and punishing them and calling it accountability? There's disconnects around words like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a leader once, and I was an executive. She was an executive, and you meet people you just know they're not gonna like you, and now they're your boss. And she would give me feedback and she would say, I'm just being authentic. And in my head, I would be like, well, you're just being mean. You're mean. But I didn't ever challenge her on it because it was like, hey, she's my boss and she doesn't like
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you think about, sometimes people misuse, I think, the phrase psychological safety as like, yeah, I feel safe to speak up and I'm being my authentic self. But, I had a previous guest here, Steven Shedlevsky, who said, well, feeling safe to speak up isn't licensed to be a jerk. You have to think about the way your speaking up affects others. Now, I imagine have you ever run across somebody misusing the word curious, where let's say they're just constantly, maybe they're asking questions, but they're more of the what's wrong with you type, or like what's wrong? They're being really critical. I wonder if they might say, well, I'm just being curious. Have you really thought that through? Like, those aren't the most
Uh,
curious questions, are they?
yeah, I call that an insult disguised as a question.
Not helpful.
Not helpful. Or it's like when you ask a teenager, like when they, ding up the car, what were you thinking? That's not helpful.
Yeah.
Their brains are not fully developed yet. That's what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a difference in tone between, well, what allowed that problem to occur? Why did that happen versus why did you do that?
Mhm. Yeah, and it's also like if you're in a discussion with someone and it's gonna be a difficult conversation, it's one of saying, "This is gonna be a difficult conversation, but it's important for me to understand your behavior and why this happened." It's so you can if you telegraph, like, "This isn't gonna be easy, but it's important for us to get through this because
Mhm.
this relationship's important to me and this project's important to me."
What or a random thing that popped in my head based on what you're saying there, when you think about asking questions. Are you familiar, with Ed Schein and his
Yeah.
humble inquiry?
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
yeah, I saw you smiling, so I knew the answer before you said it. But, what I remember of that book is, and tell me if this is true with curiosity, that the most helpful questions in a lot of situations could be the questions you don't already know the answer to. Fair to say about curiosity, if we're should be asking questions we don't know the answer to, as opposed to guiding people to the solution we think is right by asking questions or manipulating them or steering them.
Absolutely. So 2 comments on that. One was, I went to 1 semester of law school, and they said, "A lawyer never asks a question they don't know the answer to," and I'm like, "I don't think this was for me."
Hmm.
And then, secondly, I went to an event at MIT, and I met Ed Schein,
Oh,
and
wow.
I asked my colleagues, "You gotta take my photo," and they just like, you're like a rock s is he a rock star?" And I go, "Oh, he's a rock star."
Yes.
Still have that photo of me and Ed Schein.
Yeah. Great work, and, yeah, encourage people to check out, Ed's books. He's passed away, but his legacy of his research and his books are still there. So, Deb, maybe one other question, because it almost feels like, yeah, we always have to bring up and explore something related to AI, but I'm curious about that. With everything going on now, I mean, you talk about curiosity as being a differentiator. Can you tell us about that? Of, AI can't replace our curiosity, or can it
Mhm.
not?
Oh, if you think about it, AI doesn't start until you ask it a question. And at the root of a question is curiosity. So I lean into AI with I have an idea, I give a little bit of thought, and they help me create the middle, and then I do the ending of that. Now, I'm so grateful that I've had, over 3 decades of corporate experience that I can look at that and say, "That's not quite right."
Mhm.
I can make adjustments, or that doesn't really get what I'm going for, which helps my critical thinking. But I think that at the root of AI is curiosity.
And is that a way people could explore and strengthen their own curiosity by
Absolutely.
interacting within their favorite AI tool?
Absolutely. And, either the advantage or the disadvantage is, back in the day, we would go to the library, right? We would go through the files and try to find stuff. Now it's just you can just move so quickly and have such agility on sitting at your desktop that you can get questions answered. But you do have to scrub and interrogate the data. It's not
Yeah.
always correct.
As it always says at the bottom of, these AI tools, that this tool could be wrong. So,
I remember typing after I got this long response back. I'm like, "Did you bump your head?" Let's see. He's like, "No, why?" I'm like, "It's totally off."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to be curious sometimes about the answer that it gives. Because one way I utilize AI in the overall podcast process is, to take the transcript and try to pull out, hey, what were some of the best quotes from the guest? And I've had to ask, like, is that really a verbatim quote? Like, but
Oh, yes, yes, and I've had where I would say, "Give me a case study where this happened," and it comes up with a beautiful case study, and then I'll go, "What's the reference?" "Oh, no reference, that's illustrious." I'm like, "No, I need, like, facts."
yeah. Or it'll make up plausible sounding journal articles that also don't exist, written by professors who don't exist.
I always say, "Is this true? Is this true?"
Yeah. Don't turn off the curiosity after the first answer.
Yes.
Yeah. So, our guest again today, Debra Clary. The full title is The Curiosity Curve, A Leader's Guide to Growth and Transformation Through Bold Questions. Take a look in the show notes for where you can get the book. It's available now. The reviews and the ratings on Amazon are great. So, Deb, congratulations on the launch, and thanks so much for having conversation allowed me to explore some curiosity on this topic.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sure thing.